I am standing in a land which is made sacred by Jagannath Chetana, which brought together all kinds of persuasions, Buddhist, Savara, Vaishnava, and which made even Salabega, a Muslim, sing the praise of the Katyadana. So when I heard our compare in learning in the Sri Lankan gentleman and also our Honorable MP, two thoughts came up in my mind, which is that if you want to look at India, in fact, if you want to look at the quintessential cultural heritage of India, probably you should look at its neighborhood countries, where it is preserved in its essence in an older form. And especially in Sri Lanka, where the Dipavangsha and Mahavamsha has preserved a continuous cultural history of the country. And also at countries like, because Indonesia was mentioned, where we also have this Wayang Kulit, and then Brunei, where we have the same, you see, dictum, Vineka Thunga Lekka, unity in diversity. And then in Bhutan, which has given us, what Mehbubul Haq talks about, growth with equity, a budgeting for a happiness budget. And then Nepal, where all the manuscripts which were lost in India and traveled to China, and which were retranslated back into Tibetan and are preserved in Nepal. So if there is a need to looking at the cultural cultural translators, the Lotsavas, who traveled across the Himalayas and across Asia, and recover what they had said, what they had told, and tell it forwards into the future. Now, when the Honorable Member of Parliament was talking about, trade and development, I would like to also point out that it is a time that we looked at our cultural strategies once again. That culture is not an instrument in development, it is constitutive of development. Culture is not a song and dance act. Culture is a constituent of every department of governance. There is a culture of water management, there is culture of medicine, there is culture of forestry. In our country, culture is not diverse from development. So as soon as that is understood, our task becomes clear. Because as soon as we look at what is happening in this part of the world, we can see the engulfing tide of homogenization, technification, and biocultural reductionism. And we can see that if you want to reverse this tide and ensure that life is not lost in living, wisdom in knowledge, knowledge in information, and exchange value is not placed over use value. Even when pursuing trade, we have to preserve culture. Even when pursuing the path of development, we have to preserve the cultural efficacy and specificity of all our developmental strategies. Otherwise, the developmental strategies fail because they are not culture specific, they are not community specific, they are not eco-specific. And therefore, all sacred and ecological values which are being reduced to economic and production categories also have to be, this phenomenon has to be understood. They both have to be united. And community values of guardianship of natural resources, obligations to ancestors, posterity and spirit, which are preserved by India transgenerationally and its Asian neighbors, should be recalled. And at this point of time, when we are making use of nature, instead of holding it sacred and inviolable, the diversity and interdependence of species and integrity of planetary ecosystems are being destroyed by the profligate human approach of mining nature's capital. If you want to have a proper human development index, we should recall the inaugurator of the Human Development Reports, Dr. Mehbubul Haq, that we have to unite growth with equity. And for that, we have to ensure that genetic uniformity is not destroyed, and that our seed diversity is not converted into commodity diversity, and that the collective right to unfixed ideas held by the majority of people in India and in Asia is not replaced by individual intellectual property right in fixed expressions. In fact, Swami Vivekananda once said to Sister Nivedita, "We are like cattle driven to the slaughterhouse under the whip, hastily nibbling a bit of grass on roadside." So as soon as we say this, it becomes clear that we have to look at the holistic tradition and walk the talk. And if you walk the talk, and if you want to walk the, you see, these spice routes and textile routes and slave routes and other routes which link us with Asia, then we have to understand that culture was the driving force behind all these trade transactions. That all over Central Asia, culture accompanied trade. And when we look at the National Museum, of which I have been the DG, the Dunhuang, you see, manuscripts, which were recovered and brought back to India, and many of these manuscripts are also in other parts of the world. There is a need for collaborative effort in seeing them and translating them and understanding them. In the same way, we should look at, you see, areas like Seoul, for instance, where they have a program called Diversity Days, in which life resembles arts, arts resembles life. And remember Paul Moose, who spoke about comparative religious archaeology to link, you know, India, Borobudur, and spread our conservation efforts to these countries. Because I saw that much of the conservation work there is being done by French and other German teams. And Indian conservation teams have to be spreading all over. And this conservation cannot be only of monuments. The conservation also has to be of sites and landscapes. Because all our monuments are not to be put in cordon sanitaires. They are part of a dynamic continuum with the landscape. If we look at Ujjaini, for instance, I mean, it is part of a cultural landscape in which is called Amritasya Navi. And in the same way, if we look at, you see, Varanasi, the Kashi Kshetra, or this land itself, which is Purushottama Kshetra, or anywhere we look at India or in other parts of Asia, we see that the approach is not monument-oriented. The approach is landscape-oriented. That approach is holistic. And one cannot reduce it to a monument-oriented approach because we have about 20,000 monuments under protection. We have about 10 million monuments and sites. We have more than, I think, 1 million rock art sites. We have one of the largest corpora of rock art sites in the world, entire world. But only one is a World Heritage Site. So this cannot be done by any government. The government has to incite community efforts, community participation, and that is how these cultural landscape is to be preserved. And for that, the schedule of rates, because there are concrete things which ideal things, like glass, cement, steel, and raw materials. We are talking about Marshall. Marshall's manual was a PWD manual. But if you want to also supplement the effort of Marshall, who did a yeoman's work in conserving our landscapes, then we have to also look at mud and lime masonry, adobe, glass, shell, lime plaster, and wood, brick, and burnt clay, for which the communities have to be drawn into co-partnership, and for which one has to spread out and change the approach to conservation. Well, I mean, there is another thing. I mean, since culture and development are linked in India as well as in Asia, one has to also reverse the tide of monoculture, which is invading agriculture, forestry, town and country planning. We are now surrendering polycephalic cities for monocephalic cities. We are moving away. I mean, when I was in Chhattisgarh as Additional Chief Secretary, I mean, 23,000 varieties of paddy were preserved in germplasm by Dr. Richaria. Now there would not be more than 40. I mean, this diversity of slow growing and long, you see, gestation lag varieties is also part of culture. They're all preserved by local, you see, people. And similarly, in forestry also, unless we move away from timber forestry to non-timber forestry, because the future of the economy belongs to the minor forest produce economy of the country and the Asian countries, which are full of forest and hill-based tribes. So, talking about culture per se, one could give a lot of quotations, and one could talk a lot about what exactly was being said. But then the basic thing is that in Indian tradition, as in South Asian tradition, which has shared it to some extent, we were trying not only to be mantrabid, but also atmabid. And there was a stress on agama and nigama, wisdom and method, pragya and upaya, abhudaya and nishriyasha, secular and spiritual uplift, paramarthika and vyavaharika. The two are not divorced, as culture and development are not divorced. And for that, if one has to release the spirit once again, one has to counter the ideology of, let us say, the Hegelian ideology that Indian tradition is just an attempt to finitize the divine or divinize the finite, or Marx's suggestion that this is a perverse fetishistic exchange, or Freud's that this is a dream image emerging from paranormal psychic states, about Indian art, of course. So one has to look at Indian cultural heritage, some of its traditions, in which the human being is not, as in the West, a bearer of the telos to control the rest of the world, but he is part of the web of nature. He is not its weaver. And that is the fundamental difference in our perceptions. And so the one presiding over the universe is invoked as Shamdeshya, Videshya, Daiva, Manusha in Atharva Veda. And in Ashokan inscriptions, Sabe Munise Vajamama. And then in Anekantabada, Shayadbada, Saptabhangi Naya, Pratitta Samudbada, all these philosophical formulations, I mean, in different religious persuasions, there is always this stress on probabilism, on possibilism, on relativism, on acceptance of the other person's viewpoint. And this is the surest method of resolution of conflicts, because out of clash of errors, truth emerges. And so the principle of mutuality has to be accepted, and and it is also subject to change. As the Rigveda says, Ritam Nabhyam Jayatam. It is always subject to change with time, and we do not have to be, fixed in certain postulates. And similarly, in all our sanskaras, Desha Kala Jattacharas, all the elements of nature are invited to sit with you and perform these sanskaras with the family. And in Sahitya Darpana, it says that our cultural heritage or our arts are not for entertainment, not for mere elevation or anxiety or utility. It is for utkantha vinodana, vyutpatti matra, or vyapara matra. No, not for that, but for rectification of personality, for brahma swada sahodara. So therefore, if one looks at some of our yogic images, I mean, when we look at our images and our sculptures, we do not look at them with this dibba chakshu, which was given to us by our traditionalists. I mean, which is rangena vidyate chitram tattami akshara varjitam, and bagartho vya samprikto parvati parameshwaru. Meaning and shape are inherent to each other. And so the yogic form tells us that these are not, people retiring into sanctuaries or solitaries or, cowards fleeing before the revolution, but they are guides, redeemers, and benefactors advancing on chaos and darkness. So, as soon as we revive these ideas, and remember, for instance, Swami Vivekananda's words, man is an infinite circle whose circumference is everywhere, center is in one place. God is an infinite circle whose circumference is nowhere, center is everywhere. Man becomes God if he multiplies infinitely his center of consciousness. With this, another quotation which reinforces him, Bala Saraswati, about a temple and music. A recital is like a temple. Its outer tower is Alarippu, halfway hall Jatiswaram, great hall Shabdam, Hali Sanctum Barnam, self-fulfillment in Padam. Their cascading lights are withdrawn, drum beats die down. In Tillana, the final burst of sound takes place, and one is alone with God. First we have meter and melody, and from then melody and meter, and then music, meaning and meter, and finally musing, meaning without meter. So this is the syncretism, this is the confluence, this is the convergence which we are seeking. And once we try for it, and also look at our some of our shastras like Nyaya Shastra, it is talking about eudaimonism rather than pessimism. Our grammar, which talks about bridging word and meaning. Our you see, the theory of involution rather than evolution. Our concern with tirthas, which are the surest, you see, answer to environmental pollution. And our Raja Dharma, which is based on Trivarga, as propounded in Shanti, Sabha, and Vanaparva of the Mahabharata. So, as soon as we join our hands with our Asian neighbors and look at our with the diaspora of ideas, not only of monuments and sites, in Central Asia, in Southeast Asia, in East Asia, we shall then be able to recall a universe which was not empty of personality, which is also in consonance with the scientific perception of non-linear mathematics, fluid mechanics, high energy physics, and isomorphism of verbal and genetic codes, in which there is no differentiation between matter and energy, between the physical and the spiritual. And this is the way that the environmentalists also think today, that hidden worlds connect to the things, to hide them, tide poles connect to the unfathomable seas, which connect with our chromosomes. To end, Heidegger, who was a critic of the Western Malay, had spoken of us as tenants of a time of need, which lies under a double lack and a double not. The no more of the gods that have fled, and not yet of the God that is coming. He adds that if Europe is to fulfill or heal itself, it has to open itself up to other great beginnings. And those other great beginnings remain to be fulfilled and lying dormant in India and its neighborhood. Thank you.